Hi, today we'll be covering how you can actually integrate GitHub Actions with a Node.js project. Now, in the previous video, we learned about the basics of GitHub Actions. We also saw how you can actually implement GitHub Actions inside of a GitHub repository, and we learned about the main structure of how you can actually define a YAML file to actually run workflows within GitHub Actions. Today, we'll be learning how you can actually integrate GitHub Actions to not only build, test, but also actually deploy a node project on platforms such as Heroku and DigitalOcean. So, without wasting any further time, let's get started. Hi. So last time we covered the basics of GitHub Actions, where we basically took an example of a very simple action to check out the code and also with a Python linter. Now, what exactly workflow is? A workflow is essentially a configurable automated process that allows you to actually run one or more jobs. And you can basically see the workflow that we have created over here with this main.yaml file, and this is stored inside of the .github/workflows folder. Now, of course, the main constituents within this particular are the first thing being events. So every time a workflow is created, we need to specify a particular event that will actually trigger that particular workflow, and that's what is defined by on. So it could be whether it's a code push, or like, let's say a pull request is created, and then we come to the jobs part. So essentially, jobs is a set of steps that a workflow should actually execute on a particular runner. Now, of course, this could either be like a shell script or an actual action. Now, of course, what exactly is a runner? The runner is the server that actually this particular workflow actually runs on. So by default, GitHub provides us the Ubuntu latest, and of course the next is the action. So action is what is actually performing a repetitive and a complex task. It is a custom application that is hosted on the GitHub Actions platform, and actions will essentially do a particular action, and you can actually run multiple actions as well inside of a particular step. And those are essentially the basic constituents of the GitHub Actions. All right, now I'll go ahead and create our repository. So let's name it GitHub Actions node. Let's select the one as myself, and we'll go ahead and make it a public repository. Add a README and we'll create the repository, and we'll quickly go ahead and clone it to our system. So let's do a clone this repository, and we'll quickly go ahead and open this up. So let's go ahead and do this, and now we'll quickly open the terminal. All right, so the first thing that we'll do is we'll just initiate npm. So we'll just use npm init to initiate our node project, and we'll just give all basic details just to sort of create our package.json. So our package.json has been created. Now we'll install a few important node modules. So of course, if you're aware of how node works, so we have a number of npm, that's the node package modules. So we are going to be installing a couple of ones that are going to be really important. The first one being Express. So Express is a framework within Node.js for doing a lot of web applications. So working with APIs, you can install Express. It's one of the most widely used npm packages. So we'll be installing Express, and also since today we are going to be involving some test cases, we are going to be writing some test cases. So we're going to be installing a couple of other npm packages, including Jest, which is Jest is a really famous open source Facebook created open source testing platform, testing framework by Facebook, and we are also going to be using Supertest, which is used for testing HTTP servers. Since today we'll be showing how to make an HTTP call, essentially a get and a post request, we are going to be using both Jest and Supertest. So what we'll do is, again, we'll just simply go ahead and install them. So we'll do Jest and Supertest, and we'll just save them. So we'll go ahead and install both of these other dependencies as well. Now, once this is done, we can actually go ahead and start creating our application. So we'll just wait for these to get installed. And as soon as this gets installed, we'll start creating our application. And of course, the idea for today's GitHub Actions tutorial is that we are going to be creating a node project where the GitHub action will be used to actually go ahead and build the project, install all the necessary dependencies, test the node project, and in case the test passes, only then we should be able to actually deploy our project. In case we are not able to pass the test, then the deployment should actually not go ahead. So we'll be seeing some unique capabilities that you can actually install within, that you can actually add within your GitHub action today. So we'll be looking at that as we'll go ahead and actually start creating our GitHub action for this project. So the next thing is that we'll go ahead and create a source directory. And within the source directory, we'll basically go ahead and create three different files. So the first one is going to be our index.js. So we'll go ahead and in this, we'll just create an index.js file. Now, essentially what this index.js file will contain is that we are going to be creating the example application where we are going to be listening to a particular port. So the idea is that we will be using Express, using which we'll be able to make an GET request, and that GET request will basically be then used to be imported within this index.js file, and we'll essentially listen at a particular port. So what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be creating another file, and that will be, let's say, app.js. Now this app.js will contain our code for using the npm module, that is the express module. So the way we do it is that we define the variable that is express, and we use the require keyword, which essentially allows you to use a particular npm module that you have installed. So in this case, it being express. Now next thing that we're going to be doing is that we'll define our app, and we'll define it as the function express. Now the next thing that we're going to be doing is that we're going to be defining our get request, and in this case it will be app.get. And over here now we can define if there is going to be let's say a specific endpoint. So let's say that we can call the endpoint as test node. That means we're just going to be testing out this particular. So since it's a get request, we are not actually sending any body with it. It will just simply we just want to see whether it's actually able to share any response from it or not. Now of course with this we'll also send the request and response. So of course over here this will be the request and response. So the response that we actually plan to get is let's say we could do something as simple as just get a hello world or something printed out. So we'll actually see how we can actually do that. So what we like to do is we'll actually like to get that in case we do receive or let's say in case our code is actually correct, what we'll do is we'll send status code of 200, which means that it's a successful code. It's for success. There are different type of error codes, so 200 is mainly used for success. And we'll send a message. It could be let's say, yes, the test node endpoint worked. So let's say we can say this in case we do get a successful return code. And of course we'll just go ahead and complete this. And now what we'll do is since we would want to actually use this module to be available to other functions that we create, we'll actually do module.exports. This allows for this particular module to be used by other functions within our project. So we'll go ahead and actually do that. And now within our index.js file, we'll actually import our app.js module, since we have used module6.export app. So we'll actually go ahead and say, let's say const app is equal to require again to import this particular module inside of this particular function. And in this case, we are going to be using app, since this module actually exists within our code base over here. So we're able to use this, and then we'll also define a specific port. So let's say the port that we define is going to be let's say 3000. Or in case you also have like let's say an environment variable, you can also define that. So we can also define something like dot process dot env dot port number. So in case you have a dot env file and you define like let's say the port is equal to 5000, so depending on whether there is an environment file or not, either it will take the default value of 3000 or it will be able to actually fetch the value from the environment. For being able to use this, you do require a package known as .env. So you will have to use that in case you do actually have .env file. So for now, I'll just go ahead and delete the environment file. But yes, this should be good enough for getting the port. And of course, just put a semicolon. And now, of course, what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be doing an app.listen. So essentially, it will be listening at this particular port. So we'll define the port, and then we'll define, okay, like what is the response that we want to actually see. So I'll just use the arrow function and define or sort of do a console log on our server side that it basically tells us that yes, it is actually listening. So we can say the app is listening on, and of course over here we can also use something like this. So we can define the port. So over here we can simply just go ahead and define this. All right. So this should ideally fetch us the port value, whatever is the port. So we'll be able to see what is being listened to over here. And of course, the next thing is over here, and we'll just simply go ahead and close this over here. All right. So let's see. So this should be good enough. And now what we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and create our test case. So since we are using Jest, the way in which we actually define any kind of a test case in Jest is that we basically, for whichever file we actually want to create a test, we'll say file.test.js. So that's the nomenclature in which how we actually create test case in Jest. So over here, what we can do is we'll simply just create a file name as app.test.js, and we'll add a test case for our app.js code. So again, what we'll do is we'll simply go ahead and import our app component that we have created. So we'll do that, and then we'll also import supertest. So we'll say const supertest is equal to require, and in this we'll require supertest, which we had installed, the package for which we had installed initially. And we'll also just have another one that is required, and this request. So this comes from the supertest function. So this will basically just pass our app. So we'll be using this. Now the structure in which how like we always write a test case in Jest is that we have to use the describe keyword. In this we basically define the specific endpoint. So over here, like let's say that we are going to be actually going to be doing the we are since our endpoint that we have defined is a test node. So we are going to be going ahead and defining the test node, and then we'll say that there should be an endpoint. So again, the idea is going to be that what we want over here, as we start to actually go ahead and define, we'll simply just again give an arrow function over here and define that. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is that we'll say that, of course, in case we want to describe this particular function, it should actually return a response to us. And in this case, so we'll describe the test as should return a particular response. So now what we'll also want to define is that this should be an async function. So that means that it will first wait for the actual test to pass, and then once we actually get the response, then only it will actually execute it. So we'll create an async await request response structure over here. So over here we'll just define our async, and again we'll go ahead and define our arrow function. And within this, what we'll say is that we'll define our response as, again, we'll wait for a request to actually do that. So we'll say request.get, and within this we'll call the endpoint, which is the test node endpoint. So we'll wait for the response to actually get from this. Now, of course, what we expect the actual response code to be. So we can define our request, the response status. So the status code that we are going to be having, that should actually be, so we'll say to be, the response should be 200. So the actual response that we have, that should be 200. And of course, the other thing that we expect for the response text to be. So the response text that we expect, so this will be the response dot text, and this we expect to be the thing that we have defined within our value. So that is supposed to be, yes, the test node endpoint worked. So this is what is expected to be an accurate test. So this is what we actually expect. So now what we'll go ahead and do is we'll simply save this, and we can actually go ahead and test this out. So first, let's go ahead and see if this actually works. So we are currently in source folder. So we'll just go ahead and say node. First, we'll just see if this actually works or not. So we'll say node index.js, and you can see that the app is listening on 3000. So let's just go ahead and do localhost 3000 and run the test node. And as you can see that it actually does print yes, the test node endpoint worked. And we'll also go ahead and test whether our test case also runs. For that, what we'll do is that we'll define both the start script and also the test script to the list of scripts that we have. So here we can remove this default test script and actually add test, because that's what we're going to be using. So in this case, our test file is app.test.js. So we'll define the location of that over here. And of course, we'll also define our start script. So the start script is going to be essentially node, and since our folder lies in source folder, so we can say no, sfc. Now if I go ahead and just do, and I'll just come back, and if I say npm start, so this should actually run again. And if I go ahead and clear this, and if I say npm test, so, and it does pass. So I think we are pretty good at this particular stage to actually set up a workflow where we want to actually go ahead and install the necessary packages and actually then run a test as well using our workflow. So for that, I'll just also just create a gitignore file. And over here, we'll just add our node modules so that you don't have to push them. So yeah, I think that's good enough. Now the next thing, of course, what we'll do is we want to actually set up our workflow. So we'll define our folder. So it will be .github, and within this we'll define workflows, and we'll be defining a file over here. So let's say we call it main.yaml. So this is where we'll actually start by defining our workflow. So of course, what we want to do is that whenever we push any particular change to our main branch, we want to actually go ahead and publish those changes, or deploy those changes onto, let's say, Heroku. So we can always define, so the first thing that we'll define is define the name. So let's say we can give the name to our YAML as a NodeJS GitHub action. Of course, we can just define it like this. And then of course, the next thing that we'll do is we'll define the on. So let's say that the event on which it should happen is push. And so whenever the change will take place on push. Now another alternate way to actually also do this is that you can define something like if you want to actually make this particular GitHub action work on only specific branches. So you could do also something like this, where you define the push event, but also whenever you're pushing to certain branches, like let's say this could be main, it could be dev. If you have whatever different type of branches, again you can define. But for now, this is also another way to specifically just define if you are pushing to a particular branch. For now, we'll just go ahead and put it as a general push. Now, what we're going to be doing is that we'll look for specific Node.js based GitHub actions that allows you to actually set up a Node.js. So we'll just say GitHub actions, actions setup Node.js. So the one that we are looking out for is the setup Node.js environment. So we are going to be using this in our GitHub action today. So again, since we have now defined our on and that will be push, so we can go ahead and define our jobs, and like let's say that this would be the build job, and again the first thing that we'll define is runs on. So like let's just use the default Ubuntu latest that's provided by GitHub. Now of course we can go ahead and define our steps. So the first thing that we'd want to do is actually first of all use the checkout actions so that our repository is accessible for the workspace to be used for the workflow to successfully run. So of course this is pretty standard that you'll be using in any sort of GitHub Actions project that you define. So we'll say that this uses, and this uses the actions at the rate checkout at the rate v2. V3, we can use V3 as well, and then we can define the name, and we can define, like let's say that okay, use node, let's say, and of course this will use. Now the next thing that we'll define is once we have checkout from our code. So essentially this is what is going to check out the repository to be accessible. And then of course the next thing that we can define is our setup node. So the way to actually use this is the action setup node v3, and then you define which particular version of a node do you actually want to use. So we can go ahead and actually use this over here. So we'll define and we'll say that this should be, and of course the structure would be like this over here, with, and just make it like this. So what it means is that we are going to be using the setup node that will allow us to actually set up all the required packages, managing our node modules, everything with that. And we also specify which particular version of node are we using. So you can use multiple versions by defining, you could actually use something like a matrix that allows you to have multiple versions of node as well. So defining the version, and as it says that this particular is actually optional. And then additionally, what we like to also define is that once we define our version of node, we'll actually go ahead and define another name. So in this case, what we can do is we can go ahead and we can actually remove this if you want. So we'll just do this, and we'll go ahead and just give this a name. So let's say that the name that we give to it in this case could be install the dependencies, and then like let's say we'll run the specific command, and the command would be to npm install, right? And of course the other one that we can define is to actually run the test. So in this case this would be run test, and of course we'll be running npm test. So this will give us a good idea. So let's actually go ahead and define this. So this should be good enough for right now, since we have defined our to be able to actually install the dependencies and also run our test. So let's actually go ahead and push our code and see if this actually runs or not. So push GitHub action for node. So let's go to our repository now and see if this actually materializes into what we want. So we'll go ahead directly to our actions, and over here you can see that we have our Node.js GitHub action. It's starting with this build process. So it's starting the job, and let's see if it actually works or not. first thing that it does is check out, then it uses the node, installing all the necessary dependencies that are there in the project. So it's running this right now, and now it's running the tests. So in this case, since the test was successful, it did actually run the build. Now, just to sort of quickly see if, we say that instead of the expect response, in case let's say go ahead and change our app.js and say that yes, the endpoint worked and returned correct value, let's say. And if we change the message that we are sending across this, and let's go ahead and actually let's go ahead and push this code and see if this actually works or not. So we'll say change message, and we'll go ahead and push this. And now let's try to see if we actually this actually works or not. So in this case, our test should actually fail. So we'll go back to our actions, and since we have changed the message, this should actually go ahead and not work ideally. So we'll quickly check if this actually works or not. So we'll just wait for our test to also run and see if that actually works or not. So in this case, as you saw, that the test didn't actually pass, and that is why our build also failed. So that is why our workflow failed. So that is now once we have actually wanted to test whether our test case actually works or not. So now what we want to expand upon this is that we would want to actually go ahead and deploy this project, let's say on Heroku. So now we learn how we can actually deploy this project on Heroku with the help of GitHub Actions, and how you can manage your secrets with the help of GitHub Actions. So we'll just go ahead and actually remove this so that this works perfectly fine, and this will be test node. So we'll just go ahead and save it to ensure this will work in the future. Now, of course, the next part is to deploy and learn how we can actually deploy our project to Heroku. So for that, we'll go ahead and we'll go to Heroku, and we'll actually create our account on Heroku. So we'll go ahead and create a new account on Heroku. So let's just go ahead and do that and define this, and just quickly go ahead and do this, and let's create our account. Now once we do that, I'll just quickly go to my email, and I will quickly go ahead and wait for account confirmation. All right, and I'll quickly set up a password. All right, and this is set up. Now we'll go ahead and just accept all of this, and we are done. Now what we want to do is we want to actually create a new application. So we'll just go ahead and create a new app. We can define our app name as node GitHub action. So let's see if this is available. This is available to us. That's great. So we'll define this. Now to be able to actually run this, we would need essentially the API key. So every project, so for that we'll have to go to our account settings, and we'll find we'll fetch that over here in this API key. So we'll just go ahead and select this, and we'll be adding this to our GitHub repository. Now the way we can actually do that is by going to our settings and going specifically to our secrets, where we'll be defining a secret for our actions, and we can define a new secret. Now, of course, the value that we're going to be storing is this API key that we have. And let's say that we can define this as the Heroku API key. So we can define this as our secret. And the two other things that we're going to be needing, and of course for that would be, so essentially the Heroku deploy is the GitHub action that we're going to be using. So it's this one. This is the one that we have, the Heroku action, and of course, what this is one of them, but you can also use some other ones, such as there is one by Akhil. So you can look specifically for this Akhil. Yes, I think this is the GitHub action for Heroku. Let's see if we are able to find that. Yeah, this is the one. So this is also another alternate one that you can actually use, which is deploy to Heroku. So these are a couple of options that you can actually use. So let's actually go ahead and use this one. So of course, in this case, what we want to do is we'll go ahead back to our main.yaml file and define actually a new job, and which will be named as deploy. So this will be used for deploy. Now, of course, again, this will runs on. We can just copy this, since this will use it the same, and then we'll define the steps. So the steps, of course, would be that, like, we are going to be doing the uses. So of course, we'll define the uses over here, which particular action that it's going to be using. So again, since we want it to check out, so we'll just use checkout at 3, and then of course it uses so we are going to be using this one. So basically it uses this, and we can use this configuration that we have. So let's go ahead and actually use this and define this over here. And over here, of course, as you can see, that it is going to be using the secrets.heroku API key that we have actually defined right now, and it's going to be using the Akhil DNS Heroku deploy. And over here we can define the email that with which we have created our account. So I'll simply give this over here, and then of course the name of the app that we have given. So the name of the app that we have created over here is Node GitHub action. So you can just copy this and paste it over here, and this should be good enough. Yes, but of course, one thing that we do need to mention over here is that, since, like, we want the app to only get deployed in case our test actually successfully runs, and we wouldn't want this to run in case our app does not successfully run. So in this case, I will actually just go ahead and revert this particular change and actually keep it intentionally wrong, so that we can actually see that in action. So what we want to do is, instead, we want the deploy to only work, or deploy to actually take place in case our earlier one, that is the build one, actually does run successfully. So in this, what we are going to be using is the keyword needs, and this will be dependent on a particular job that we are running, which is the build job. So in case the build job is successful, only then the deploy will work. In case the build one is not successful, then the deploy will not take place. So let's actually see how this actually takes place. So we'll just go ahead and do this git commit, and we'll deploy add deployment GitHub action. We'll just push this change, and let's see that what happens by going to our repository. And of course, this has invoked over here. So let's go ahead and see what happens. So you can see now there are essentially two different jobs that are running. The first one is the build job, and once that is successful, of course in this case it will fail. Since this will fail, and we have mentioned the condition of needs, this actually did not even proceed further. So as you can see that it was actually skipped because the build one was not successful. Now let's go ahead and quickly just correct our message over here in app.js to see if it actually does work for us this time. So let's go ahead and quickly push our code, and just find this correct the error message, and we'll go ahead and push our code. And this time, let's see if our action does successfully run or not. So first step is the build step. So in this case, the test should actually run correctly. And right now it's setting up the job, and then it will install the packages, run the test, and as you can see that it ran it successfully. Now in this case, since the build did run successfully, now it is starting the deploy script, and let's see if this actually runs correctly or not. So in this case, it's setting up the job. First it will check out, and it will get the credentials that we get from Heroku, from the API key. It will take the name and the email that we have provided, and then if everything is correct, it will successfully be able to actually deploy the code onto Heroku. So it's just waiting right now. So it was able to successfully log in into actually Heroku using the API key that we provided with the credentials, and now it's doing all these different steps and actually did run successfully. So that's really awesome. Now if we go to our Heroku, when we go to our project, this should actually show us the step, and you can see that this actually got deployed. You can see over here that the latest activity, the build succeeded, and this has actually run. So if we now go ahead and actually open this deployed app, so as you can see that it does actually work. We get the response as yes, the test node endpoint worked. So that is great. So of course, the next thing that we also can do is that we can actually use something like DigitalOcean as well. So instead of using, like, let's say, if you don't want to use Heroku, you can also alternative use DigitalOcean. So I'll quickly just sign in into the account. So let's just go ahead and sign in with GitHub, and we should be able to see. So of course, what you could alternatively also do is, like, let's say, create a new droplet, and by clicking on a new droplet, you can create a new droplet and actually take, like, let's say, a Node.js based project from the marketplace. So over here you can select, like, let's say, a Node project. So Node.js, you can select that. You can select all the basic plan, and select a volume, add an SSH key. In my case, I already have one, and select all the necessary things that you want, and go ahead and actually create the droplet. Let's go ahead and actually see. So for example, over here we have this node GitHub action that I've already created, and I can actually go ahead and show you how this actually looks by going to the console. So in the case, if you're, like, let's say, using the GitHub action, and you want to actually like, you have your project deployed on like, let's say, DigitalOcean. So of course you can find a specific deploy to DigitalOcean Node.js, and you will be able to find specific GitHub actions just for those marketplace. So this can be used over here. So we can, like, actually deploy to DigitalOcean specifically for Node.js based projects for DigitalOcean as well. And in that case, what you'll be needing to submit are essentially four main things. That would be the SSH key for your DigitalOcean, your host, which will be your IP address, your username, the username which will be essentially either, like, let's say, root, or if you have created a custom user, and also, of course, like, let's say, the port. So in this case, like, it could be port 3000, 5000, and these are the additional details that we'll be putting up instead of, like, let's say, over here in this case, we have the main.yaml. So instead of the Heroku API key, Heroku app name, email, you'll be using the secrets, where essentially in your repository, the main things that you'll be putting up inside of your secrets would be over here. The instead of Heroku would be all related to DigitalOcean, and you'll be using a relevant GitHub action for your DigitalOcean project. Of course, that is able to fetch all those different values. So if I actually go to the marketplace, we can actually try to search if we have over here DigitalOcean node. So let's see if we get that, or DigitalOcean deploy. So we can actually see some of these actions that allow us to do DigitalOcean. So we can just search for DigitalOcean as well, and you can see all these different different GitHub actions that can actually be used with DigitalOcean, and you can use either of these to actually go ahead and deploy your project via DigitalOcean as well. And similarly, you'll also find ones for so if we go to, like, let's say our actions tab, and if you want to create, like, let's say a new workflow, you can see you can publish Node.js package to GitHub packages. You can find for AWS, you can find for GCP, so you can search specifically for GCP, Azure. So you'll find basically or different types of deployment ones as well, so you can use based on the deployment service that you actually use. So in this case, we showed an example using Heroku, but also you can do it for DigitalOcean or any other platform as well. But I hope that gives you a good idea. Of course, what we did over here was we went ahead and we created a GitHub action for a Node.js project where it is able to actually test the project and then also be able to actually deploy the project as well. So thank you so much for attending today's session. And of course, in case you have any questions, feel free to share those comments with us in the comment section below in the YouTube. So, and we'll be more than happy to take up those questions. And of course, we'll be taking up a lot more other sessions related to GitHub Actions and DevOps in the near future. So stay tuned for all of those. Thank you very much.